Please join me on the stage, three extraordinary leaders who I will introduce momentarily. Mina, what a way to start our morning. As you heard yesterday, as we all talked about yesterday, now is the time. It is the time to act. The urgency of now is upon us. And what a perfect setup to talk about this. And what we're talking about is not one thing or another. It is the collective problem of climate and water. Water somehow gets lost. It is the essence of life. There is no person sitting in this room who doesn't need water for every part of what they do. Yet we don't think about it, we don't act, we don't adjust our systems, our design, our personal habits. And what we realized today and yesterday and for the years that we've been looking at this, the time to act was yesterday. It was last year, it was 5 years ago. But if not enough has been done, now is the time to do it. Water is impacting every part of our humanity. Bob's going to talk a little bit not only about what his business is doing for water, but its tie to women and to life and to humanity and what that means. Our speakers are going to talk about what we need to do to act. As you know, the Series Conference is never about just talking. It's not only about identifying problems. If we don't leave here collectively, individually and collectively, acting, changing something, and come back next year with progress made, we will have failed. The problem's clear. I'm not going to spend one more minute talking about it. Mina could not have said it better. We know how much we need to act. For companies that we talk to, and certainly not the hundreds in this room, it is really a marginal issue. It has got to be upped. For the investors we work with, 3 years ago, we talked to hundreds of analysts about how they are integrating water risk into their evaluations of companies. Many knew it was an issue. None of them had a practice of integrating that risk into who and what they were valuing. That is almost mind-boggling. A company that works in Cape Town and has a manufacturing facility and is told they cannot run their facility is not a company that's going to thrive, and it's not a company an investor is going to do well with. It's obvious to all of us. I don't need to go further, but as we call on companies, starting with the agricultural sector, where 70% of our water is used, and many of you know we're working with you, and we're tough and pushing and making the case. The time is now. The urgency of now is upon us. So let's clearly dig in with three extraordinary leaders. And I want to briefly introduce them. You've got longer bios in your program books. But this is the essence of what government, what corporate America, and what the investor movement can do, must do, and where we need to go. They're not responsible for everybody. What they are responsible for is enterprises and actions that are already making a difference. They've got a great story to tell. Let me start with introducing all three of them, starting with Hank Ovink. I'm going to tell you he's a force of nature. That doesn't say those words in his bio. But with a short time with him, you will be blown away. He's the Special Envoy for International Water Affairs at the Cabinet of the Netherlands. Hank leads the UN High-Level Panel on Water, and he's an expert being called out and into every part of our global economy. Just meeting with him this morning, he's been in Asia, he's been in Europe, he was in Sacramento yesterday, going to New York next week. I was breathless at his schedule, and sometimes I think mine is great and so lovely and so important that you're doing that. And let me talk about Bob Fisher just for a minute. And again, you could read in his bio, we know he started and has led the gap in the enterprises that are part of it successfully as a leading company interest in sustainability. He's got and has recognized sooner than others the deep connection between water and community well-being. He has set a high bar for corporate action on water, working with his teams to implement global leadership programs. He's also a philanthropic leader, supporting so many of us as a co-founder of the Pisces Foundation. What Bob is a visionary, though. It's not water alone that he chose to act on. The GAP looks at its water program is about humanity, about women, to call out the impact of water or a lack thereof as it relates to women, to humanity, and what it means to their lives, was the chart Bob charted and has been executing with his great teams at the GAP. And the third sector that we have here, Hank on government, Bob on the corporate sector, Betty Yee. Many of you know her, the controller of the state of California, statewide leader, who has worked on the boards with her pension funds, CalPERS, CalSTRS, assets totaling $500 billion. Betty has worked to integrate sustainability, climate risk, water risk, into how they think, what they do, and frankly, where they ought to go. She is a visionary, she's a pioneer. We are grateful to have her as a series board member. She is a leader in our effort, Climate Action 100+, where we have 340 investors globally, whose assets total $32 trillion, coming together, working together to act on these issues. And with Betty's leadership, we are making progress with some of the most complicated companies. So let me stop. I am honored. It is a true privilege to be here with these three colleagues. Let's dig in. So Hank, let me start from you. We heard from Mina loud and clear the urgency of the water crisis. What is stopping us as a world community? Why isn't this urgency better understood? What do we need to do to change that? We could ponder the whys, but more importantly, you tell us, 700 strong in this room, leaders of financial institutions and corporate America, what should they all be doing to change the course of our future?
Yeah, water is very complex. I brought an image by a good friend, Cynthia van Elk, who helps us capture the story of water in Asia. This is actually in the city of Chennai. And I want to couple this image, because we can deep dive into the complexity of water, and because it's so complex, it's health, it's security, it's peace, it's economy, it's urban, it's biodiversity, it's, oh, you lost me, right? Eh? What do you care? So if it's so complex, what can I do? But I'll make it twice as complex as Mina said. So thank you so much for your inspirational journey. You asked one thing. I'm going to ask you two things before leaving the room. And perhaps you can promise this, is that one, never, ever, beyond today, this moment, will you ever lose one drop of water again?
Yes.
Can I hear that better?
Yeah.
Because that is one, eh? Take care of the water we don't, eh? So that's the first. And second, put a price on it, a value better. Because if we don't start to value water comprehensively, it doesn't get in return to us. And we have a hard time. Water is a human right, so even some constitutions around the world, you can't put a price on water, but you can put a price on its services. You can mitigate the inequality, and at the same time, you have to capture the value. But that means we have to get out of our short-term perspectives. We think water is a cost. You pay and you get a return. But water is a value. And in the context of the economy, in the context of climate change, that value really is underscored. And if we don't get to that value better, we're lost. And you are much better at it than I am. I'm a diplomat running the world and chasing water, as Mina is doing, and trying to build practices to value water better. But you know how to calculate your risks, right? Now, water is a risk, and you don't like risks. But water could also be a real value, one that adds value to your business if you manage it right, if you understand its complexity, and if you value it across the board. So stop wasting any drop. And it's in the cities, it's in our businesses, it's around the world where we build canals to get the water out, they go to the ocean, the fresh water is lost, it becomes saline. Then we build huge desalination plants that take out all our energy that comes from coal, and then we put the leftover brine, which is actually very contaminating, back into the ocean, create another environmental disaster. I don't understand it. There's enough water we have, but we just don't care for it. So never waste another drop and put a price on it.
Great. Bob, the role of corporate America is clear. A lot can be done, not enough is being done. but the Gap has been a pioneer, and it would be great to hear what you're doing and how you were able to pull it off and why others aren't. What can you tell us to speed it up?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me here, and it's exciting to see this many people that care about water, which is, as Hank said, if not the most important issue in the world, one of the 2 or 3. Just a little bit of background on Gap. We design and manufacture clothing, and as Mina mentioned, clothing uses a lot of water. A pair of jeans takes 1,600 gallons of water to manufacture a pair of jeans. Our process starts with design. We're a vertically integrated retailer, so we design the clothes, and a lot can be done right from the design stage. The kinds of fabrics that we use and how we use them, the utilization as the garments are made. So starting with design, then into manufacturing. And whether we're making cotton or synthetic garments, water is used throughout that entire process. Most garments are finished in laundries, and so a great deal of water is used in the laundering process. And then those garments find their way into stores, and post-consumer is post-purchase is also a major use of water. In fact, maybe the largest use of water is going to go on after garments are consumed, after garments are purchased. And I saw a technology just the other day where antimicrobial technology where you can wear a garment 3-4 times and it doesn't smell. Well, that cuts back on the use of water in your own personal laundry, and so that can have major impacts. At Gap, we work very hard to measure those water impacts. Cotton is the major input. We're one of the 2 or 3 largest consumers as a company of cotton around the world. Well, with that goes a huge responsibility. And because throughout this whole process, cotton as an input requires water as an input. And so we have joined many partnerships, and I would advocate throughout this whole process, nobody can do this alone. It's critical that those of you in industry join partnerships because collaboratively we can have much greater impact. So the Better Cotton Initiative, where we're the fourth largest user of cotton from the Better Cotton Initiative, has been making major impact. The Sustainable Apparel Coalition, where we're founders with many other apparel companies, major impacts, but still not enough. And this is where I think it's important for those of you that are investors and advocates, call companies out on this issue. There are too many companies that are not paying attention to what's going on. And unless there's a call for action by investors, by advocates, and partnerships, the kinds of partnerships that we've helped to start and to join, unless there are those kinds of partnerships, we're never gonna impact this issue to a large enough degree. So again, we're looking at our entire supply chain from the design to the delivery into the stores. We're working hard on the cotton side. We're working very hard on the laundry side. The apparel business consumes 20% of all fresh water is used in the apparel industry. So we can have enormous impacts if we do this well, but everybody's got to do it. And I think those of you in the audience that have the ability to ask questions and demand really need to step up and do that.
Music to our ears, of course. Thanks, Bob. Betty, we recently at Ceres conducted a study when we launched our Investor Water Toolkit using SASB materiality indicators. How's that for techno talk? But we found that all 4 major stock market indexes, the majority of their holdings had medium to high water risk. Mm-hmm. Any analysis would tell you these companies that are in all of our portfolios, all of the indices, have medium to high risk. It shows how broad the problem is, how real it should be to investors, but we're not yet seeing action. As a board member to the 2 largest public pension funds in the country, CalPERS and CalSTRS, in a state that has very clear and well-known water challenges, what are the leadership steps you want to see? What are you focusing on, and what are you telling those funds? And what do we need to be telling the 340 others we work with?
Well, we've got a lot of work to do, but let me just say to Bob, pointing to someone like the GAP as something that's possible, I think is very helpful. And so as we look at really using the tools of Ceres, that's really helped really build our leadership in both pension funds to engage companies, to look at doing our first total fund water risk analysis at CalPERS, and really relying on the engagement and research that's been done through the water tools that have been provided by Ceres. This crosses every economic sector, and I would say that we look at water as really the lifeblood of our economy. You said it at the beginning. It affects every aspect of what we do in life. It really is a problem and presents challenges in all of our economic sectors. But we also find that it's really a multifaceted topic. So where do we begin to put our focus? We can talk about water quality, we can talk about water scarcity, certainly climate change and the impacts. These are all going to be relevant to investors. And at CalPERS, where we decided to start was really on the issue of water scarcity. That we're seeing that really as becoming a growing problem as supplies become much more depleted. We've got aquifers that are compromised, increased demand as we look at global food production in terms of its reliance increasing on water, and certainly the exacerbated impacts of these two factors by climate change and creating just greater volatility, and then also the increasing incidences of drought. But it's not just looking at water scarcity, but also then putting on top of that the physical climate risks that we're identifying that are happening, because we have to actually get to the accumulated risk. It's not just sufficient to look at one slice of that and think that we've got the problem solved. It's much more complex than that. And I would say out of all the things that we've looked at, this is probably the most critical issue, but it's probably the hardest to get your arms around. But the tools that Ceres has provided has just been nothing short but really helpful in getting this analysis started. But then it doesn't stop there, because we have to look at doing our own engagement with companies and to, again, have examples of companies like the GAP that are really taking this issue to heart and being a leader in terms of sustainability as relates to water. Engaging our managers, really understanding that they have a role in this as well. That when we look at the total fund, the managers across our total fund, what their strategies are, and they're exposed to some of these high-risk industries that are heavily reliant on water. And then, as I said, beyond scarcity, we're going to track our emerging research as we look at the accumulated risk and hope that we put this back into the mix in terms of how others can follow suit. At CalSTRS, again, very, very active. I want to just applaud Jack Enos, who's been such a leader in this. We are committed to continuing our engagement, and we are a member of the Investor Water Hub of Ceres. And all of this is really being informed by what we're reading about around the world every day. And we just heard earlier, a couple days ago, more and more about lives being lost due to catastrophic tailings dam failures. And these are things that are happening in real time now. And this is probably the one issue of all of the things that we're talking with that is about a race against time. We can ill afford not to each day do something to advance our commitment to looking at how we protect our water systems. But the other thing I want to say, and I'm going to just put my CFO hat on, we talk about a lot of the risks, we talk about the challenges about how to put our arms around this, but I also believe there are a lot of opportunities. And that really, of all of the things that we can talk about associated with climate risk, I believe that water actually gives us the greatest ability to deal with issues of equity. That when we start to talk about how we deploy capital, when we start to talk about how we deploy technology, where all of that goes, I think we actually can make a mark with respect to how we deal with issues of equity that we currently are struggling with some of the lesser effective tools that we have to work with.
Great. Thank you, Betty. We know that climate and water really are one. We sometimes separate them out. They impact each other so much, it's also hard. But yesterday, when I opened, and in many of our discussions, we talked about having a North Star that we need to get to, based on the IPCC report, a 1.5 degree world. Not easy to get there. In fact, we said it's radical, but it's more radical not to get there. And we've got that North Star. Water is its own problem as well as part of the climate problem, and you could cut it any way in conversation. But Hank, what is that North Star that we have for water, and what must we make sure we not do? Where are the thresholds? We are being told by Science on Climate if we keep raising our footprint and don't turn that around radically within 12 years, or
11.
now 11 and a half, it might be irrevocable. Where are those trigger points that we need to be looking at, acting at, and really revving up as it relates to water?
But I think the two things that never waste and put a price are one, and that I think that's simple said but hard done, as we see around. Second, I totally agree with Betty that yes, it's a challenge, but of course a massive opportunity. Why? Because water relates to all these challenges. The complexity is water's problem, but it's also our best opportunity. If water and health are connected, with better water provision, access and quality, it means health costs go down and opportunities for women go up. If there's access to water, women, which often is the case, don't have to walk every day for hours, and they're much more entrepreneurial than men, I have to say, they build communities rapidly faster and build economies, and therefore, again, it's good for business. And when kids can go to school, and when there's sanitation, girls don't become monthly dropouts. When kids can go to schools, and girls too, they progress even faster. So there's a real gain in working on water. But the problem with water is this complexity. Setting one goal is tough. So I think never waste one drop again, put a price on it, but also look at the value chain of water in the context of climate. 90% of all disasters around the world are water related. It's costing trillions of dollars, and it's only piling up. We invest in buildings in the wrong places because we don't have the assessments right. The next day they're flooded and we only repair the damage instead of that we repair. So perhaps the third thing next to the price and never wasting a drop is building that capacity, that understanding. And I think that capacity, that understanding is about investing in an enabling environment. And that means that you're not only investing in the product, you're investing in the people that not only get you to the best ideas, but also take them forward. An enabling environment secures that any investment you put in place today also has ownership tomorrow. And that maintenance and operation, which is like almost the least sexiest thing to think of, is actually the most important that there is. I read this great story about this man in India that now is, I think already 20 years walking around villages and taking taps that that leak and replacing them with taps that don't leak. It's very simple, but he saved 20 million liters of water just by himself. Now I think that's not the scale we want for the world. We need a bigger scale, and if I look around the room, I think if each and every one of you would do the same, but then on the scale of your companies, the scale of your investment, we would definitely change the world. So I think that partnership approach, that collaboration Bob was also talking about, is critically important, but invest it in the people too. Last, I could go on forever, sorry. I started a new program in Asia, really focusing at the forefront. How do you conceptualize the best ideas that really help us leapfrog? Because we are often, when we think about water and climate, we repeat the mistakes of the past. We invest in stupid infrastructure or things that only last for a day or a week. That process is really about engaging with everyone. We bring the best experts from around the world. We work with the communities, the universities, yes, also with the governments and the businesses, and with the banks. Financial partners, public and private, are in the room from the beginning. And they are really, their ears, it's a Dutch saying, their ears are getting red. They never saw a thing like this before, because what happens with the investor, often they wait until a proposal is at the table. They're never part of the conceptualizing of it, so they don't understand that complexity of water and evaluate only by their existing standards. By having them in the room now for 9 months, so early in the process, they committed last week to start to invest in things they would never believe in before, because they witnessed that their capacity to change is also in the value where they put their money. So I think change the process, be at the game early on, and invest in that process and that enabling environment to secure those millions in the beginning will make the billions you invest in the projects worth more.
Let me just follow up a bit. I read in the newspaper, I think over the last week, that literally Jakarta we're not talking about a little village,
No.
is literally having to be displaced as
Yeah,
the
that's-
capital, as a city of hundreds of millions of people or tens of millions because of water.
So this is the thing, all around the world, what happens is there is enough water, but the water doesn't come like spread out. So cities like Jakarta or Mexico is a water-balanced city, but it falls in a week, and then the rest of the 51 other weeks, it's like dry. So what happens in these cities, and Indonesia has a tradition of normalization of rivers. Yeah? You turn it into a channel, like a concrete, like LA River, you know, which is like the most closed. The Mississippi, also just a channel, not a river anymore. So why? To take the water out. It's a risk. But then you still need water to drink, for your industry. So you take it out of the ground, the aquifer, the soil. And with a growing city and a growing economy, the city is going down. So Jakarta is sinking more every year than sea level rise over the last 100 years. Semarang does the same, Chennai, Kulna, all around the world, our city sinks because we take it out. So if they sink and the water is polluted, and then with sea level rise in a storm, you're at risk. Now, I'm not saying that the solution the government presented as an idea, not as a plan, last week, is actually their best way forward. Because it doesn't take away the problem for all the millions of people that will actually stay in Jakarta, because the government is only moving, not the 10 million, the 10, 20 million people that live there. And second, it actually does not change the way how water is dealt with more sustainably. So instead of taking it head on, they try to move part of the problem, they try to move them out of harm's way, which actually, well, that's okay, let them do them, but also fix the water problem. Make Jakarta the most water sustainable city in the world, and then move away would actually be a better effort.
A clear role for government. Betty, what do you see? What do you see as what companies and investors should be doing? We know that there's individual things a company could do and investors can do, and we're going to talk more with Bob about what they did. But we need collective action, as everybody said. We need policy that affects everybody. Where do we go with the policy debate?
Well, I want to just echo what Hank said. I was thrilled to learn that he was in Sacramento last evening.
Yeah.
But this is what it's going to take. Water of all issues, public engagement, broad engagement, stakeholder engagement at every level of policy development. We need solutions that are multifaceted. We need solutions that are going to address a cross range of challenges, from contamination to access to safe drinking water. And I think about, Governor Newsom just issued an executive order on water this week. And in some ways, some have observed this should have been done 2 decades ago. But I think what's different about this is really looking at how to be integrative. And when we're talking about sustainability of water systems in the 21st century, what does that look like? Tasking his 3 largest state agencies to be the lead of this. But I don't believe it's going to go anywhere without the voices, frankly, of the investor and the business community coming together. At the end of the day, this is what continues to spark the economy, that we have to build systems that work for Bob's company, for many of the companies. We have to build systems that we know are going to be able to withstand the other aspects of climate change. But I think we have to work smarter. We're also working in an era of finite resources. And so when we look at how we're going to deploy our capital, I think we're also looking at potentially having different financing tools that will have to be developed, whether we're looking at, depending on whether we're looking at funding or financing short-term versus long-term solutions. When we talk about operation and maintenance, I mean, this is where we really need companies at the table to really help us understand what's it going to take to be able to sustain all of this. So really public engagement, broad stakeholder engagement at every level of policy development, but I think the leadership is there. And I'm just going to put this out there. I've been looking at water for a long time in California, and we're uniquely situated, obviously geographically. We care a lot about the ocean, and sea level rise is very front and center to us in California. But again, looking at opportunities. I look at, here in California, perhaps being a leader on how we develop the blue economy. As we think about the evolution of our oceans from being really a place where people come to recreate and to fish and to look at some of the more traditional enjoyment of our ocean, now really becoming the place where we are going to do a lot of research and science and being a source of energy and alternative food production down the road. We need to be on board with that. So water is much more broadly than what we've even touched the surface of today. But I think really bringing all the entities together, investor and business, essential at the table.
Great. Well, we will keep at that. Bob, I'm going to try and sneak in 2 questions as part of one, just because I want to get so much out of your head. Number one, your vision of water not being about water, but being about women and being about humanity and tying those together to community well-being. It may seem obvious, but it is not obvious to everybody. You couple those issues, and it seems to be having a double, triple impact. What are you seeing?
Well, Hank mentioned that water is a human right, and I think at GAP we came to realize that fairly early on in our manufacturing. At the same time, 80% of people that work on garments around the world, there's 66 million, I think, garment workers around the world, 80% of them are women. And also, Hank mentioned, the women have a particular role within their own communities. They're the ones responsible for getting water into their families. And so we saw a long time ago that linking water and women was a win-win for our business, for the factories, and we came up with a Women and Water program. And on top of that, we have a wonderful program through our foundation called the PACE program, which is Personal Advancement Career Enhancement. We've got a captive audience of community leaders in the women that work in the garment factories. And so we began educating them around personal hygiene, sanitation, water, budgeting, all the kinds of things that a woman in the household was responsible for. And that program has paid incredible dividends for the factories where we don't own any of our own factories, but we work with factory owners around the world. And the factory owners that have worked and implemented the PACE program have seen lower absentee rates, greater development of management, women in management, all the kinds of things from a social standpoint that we would want in factories that we use. And so coupling the philanthropy that GAP Foundation has done with the business strategy of Women in Water has been really a win-win for us.
It's been a great thing to watch. I mean, it is about the essence of life. It's humanity, it's water, and people need to understand the connection, and your programs have done that. As a corporate leader, and Bob, you're not just a corporate leader, a philanthropist, you support advocacy, and frankly, on the board of many advocacy organizations, you do advocacy. What do we tell this community, half of which are corporate leaders and investor leaders, that they need to do as we act beyond one by one? I wish everybody was the GAP. It doesn't happen that way. We need to make sure that we have a level playing field and thousands are acting. But it's going to take your voice.
Yeah, there are a couple of things. One that I like to say. One is that philanthropy has a very important role to play here. I know this conference isn't about philanthropy, but philanthropy is really a bridge, can serve as a bridge between the public and the private sectors. At Pisces Foundation, where we have 3 key programs: environmental education, where because we understand that it's important to develop our youth, to get them to understand what's going on with the world. We have a water program that's largely focused on the United States, and we've got a program in short-lived climate pollutants, the non-carbon gases that make up 40% of climate change. And so those are the focuses that we have with our philanthropy, and I think those are inextricably related to the kind of work that goes on at GAP, where we really believe that if we don't take a leadership position, no one will follow. But there are a lot of companies out there that I think are not doing what they need to do, and it's critical. I mean, Betty talked about the investor community, and I know there's a great deal of investors out there. I was speaking to the CEO at the GAP the other day. he never gets a question about climate change or water risk. Zero. And so, you know, if we want corporate leaders to actually care about this, you know, when are investors going to start selling stock of companies that don't care about this?
Right.
I mean, we can talk a lot about it. There are certainly some funds out there, and I suspect most of them are in this room, funds that are socially responsible funds, but the vast majority of the investors